Support for Louisiana, the state we're in, is provided by...
Every day, I go to work for Entergy.
I know customers are counting on me.
So Entergy is investing millions of dollars
to keep the lights on
and installing new technology
to prevent outages before they happen.
Together,
we power life.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.
They had identified a vulnerability with their software that they wanted to make us aware of.
A massive cyber breach leaves millions vulnerable.
For the state highway system, it's $18.8 billion.
The price tag for Louisiana's roads and bridges backlog grows.
And what we're finding is that the temperatures in the morning seem to be increasing even more than the afternoon temperatures.
Louisiana's record heat and humidity brings an uptick in heat-related illnesses. What you need to know.
It's a possibly once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for these guys.
Nearly all of Louisiana's death row inmates request clemency. Hi everybody, I'm Kara St. Cyr.
And I'm Karen LeBlanc.
We are 23 days into hurricane season with a named storm brewing in the Gulf and another one following right behind it.
And Tropical Storm Brett is headed toward the Caribbean at 70 miles per hour. The National Weather Service issuing advisories for Tropical Storm Brett over the eastern Caribbean.
Now we do have another storm that's also brewing in the Gulf. This one is called Tropical Storm Cindy, and the National Weather Service is issuing advisories over the central Atlantic.
Yeah, so we'll keep you posted as these storms develop.
And now on to other news making headlines across the state. Ochsner Health just began a 10-year pact with the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center that'll give Louisiana patients access to cutting-edge treatments. Ochsner announced this week that local cancer doctors have been certified by MD Anderson and will follow MD Anderson treatment protocols. Ochsner's 7 cancer centers across New Orleans and Baton Rouge will begin collaborating on patient care, participate in MD Anderson Center's clinical drug trials and therapies, and receive adjunct faculty appointments to the Texas Center. LSU football has vacated all 37 wins between the 2012 and 2015 seasons after receiving a notice of allegations of infractions from the NCAA. LSU received the notice of allegations in March 2022 due to former offensive lineman Vidal Alexander competing while ineligible his entire career. A 4-year starter, Alexander played in 50 games with only 1 absence in 2014. Alexander wasn't eligible to play because his father was paid $180,000 in funds embezzled by former head of the Our Lady of the Lake Foundation, John Paul Funes. Hundreds of Southwest Louisiana homeowners in flood-prone areas are getting help with approximately $300 million earmarked to elevate homes in Calcasieu, Cameron, and Vermilion parishes. The Southwest Coastal Project will use the funds to reduce storm and hurricane surge damage risks to structures. Nearly 4,000 structures are identified for assistance. Qualifying residential structures will be raised approximately 5 feet on average. Funding for the project comes from the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and a federal, state, and local project partnership. A massive cyber attack at the Louisiana OMV left 6 million people with Louisiana licenses vulnerable. While it's not clear why the hackers chose this particular location, GOSEP is asking people to take precautions. I spoke with Casey Tingle, the director of GOSEP, about updates on the breach and also how to stay safe. So can you tell me a little bit more about the cyber event that happened last week?
So we were notified by a third-party vendor that the state utilizes, as well as a number of other states, federal agencies, and private sector, that they had identified a vulnerability with their software that they wanted to make us aware of. At the time that they made us aware, which was May 31st, They did not have a fix yet for the software, but wanted to alert the state that there was potentially an issue with their piece of software. So at that point, the state locked down the software and immediately began an investigation into what potentially could have been impacted by that issue. After that investigation was moving forward, the software vendor announced a patch, and so the state immediately patched the software so that it could be brought back up to current state. And in the meantime, the investigation continued through thousands of files to see what was potentially impacted. And then late last week or middle of last week, the state identified a file that had the motor vehicle records that we announced last week that had been potentially impacted by that attack. And so that's when we made notification to the state through a press release on Thursday and the press conference that we held last Friday.
Is there any way to know why this particular file was targeted?
We don't believe it was targeted. We believe that the vulnerability in that particular software was something more general in nature. And so we don't have reason to believe that Louisiana in particular was targeted, that this data was in particular targeted. We believe this was part of a much larger vulnerability that crosses all clients that utilize that particular software.
So we don't know exactly why they targeted these files. You said it's likely they weren't even trying to, and we don't necessarily know all the groups that were involved, even though we have an idea. But where does Louisiana go from here? Where do regular people go from here, knowing their information is possibly out there?
That was the important part of making the public notification last week when we did. So as soon as we realized that those particular motor vehicle records had been accessed, we wanted to make the public aware of that as quickly as we possibly could, because really that's the focus of our efforts right now moving forward is what can the public do for themselves having been made aware of this as we continue the investigation. And so a lot of that guidance is on nextsteps.la.gov, and so we would direct the public to that website. We are keeping that updated with additional information as we know it and recommendations that we find. We issued another press release this week as we updated that website with some additional information. So we direct everybody there on that website. They will find a few things that we're recommending that everybody do. And first and foremost is to lock down your credit with all 3 credit bureaus. We know that can be a little bit of a tedious task, but it's an important best practice regardless of whether we had this incident or not, to regularly review your credit file and be aware of what may be on there to see if any fraudulent accounts have been opened in your name. We're not aware at this time that this data has been utilized to do any of that. And should we become aware of that, we'll make that known. But monitoring your credit, changing passwords is another best practice. We don't believe passwords were included in this. We know that passwords were not included in this data. But that's another best practice. But looking out for any unusual activity on your accounts, new credit cards, your Social Security benefits, all of that information is on nextsteps.la.gov.
And right now, what is the state doing to ensure that this never happens again?
Well, there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes. First and foremost, the investigation into this incident remains ongoing. As we look at and find the potential vulnerabilities that were involved, all of that will be a part of an after action report that we will conduct to ensure that we don't have issues like this happen in the future. Obviously, cybersecurity and cyber attacks are ongoing, and cybersecurity is a responsibility of all of us, and the state takes that very seriously.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out. I know you guys have been really busy in the last couple of days. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Louisiana is experiencing an unseasonably hot summer. Normally this time of year, temperatures hover in the low 90s. Weather experts say Louisiana has had an excessive number of days with scorching temperatures soaring into the upper 90s, coupled with above normal humidity levels. When the mercury rises, ER and hospital visits increase for heat-related illnesses. Here's what you need to know to keep cool and stay safe. So far, the summer has seen some fierce weather, record heat and humidity, and strong thunderstorms, some behaving like microbursts, others with hail.
It's been pretty obscene, obviously. We're in an El Nino, for starters. They just officially declared it a couple of weeks ago, NOAA. But what happens during El Ninos is it kind of energizes what we call the subtropical jet stream. And the subtropical jet has been very active in particular over North Louisiana. But South Louisiana has been affected too.
Now on sunny days when the temperatures soar, people are getting sick from the heat. The Louisiana Health Department is tracking the stats and has a decade of health data on emergency room and hospital visits for heat-related illnesses.
So looking at all Louisiana hospital records from 2010 to 2020 for any heat-related illness diagnoses, as well as any that are related to workers' comp or occurring on the job. And then we calculated rates by year, age, sex, race, and by parish.
The data helps the health department better monitor and assess the needs of Louisiana residents, and it's available to climate experts.
And so we want to use this data to inform climate resilient policies and practices, and then also to identify or highlight any vulnerable populations.
We're trying to collaborate and work together and try to best understand what's happening with emergency room visits, for example, and temperatures and humidity on top of it.
The report says on average annually, 3,000 people in Louisiana are hospitalized or treated in an emergency room for heat-related illnesses. It pinpoints North Louisiana with the highest rate of workers with heat-related illnesses.
What are those trigger points that suddenly starts leading to people needing to go to the hospital?
Heat-related illness happens when the body can't cool itself. High temperatures and humidity can hinder the body's ability to sweat, the main cooling mechanism that reduces core body temperature.
So once our internal heat production exceeds heat loss, or our ability to get rid of that heat that we're generating, we'll eventually reach a point where we can no longer maintain that thermoregulation. And then that's when the core temperature rises and heat stroke occurs.
Symptoms of heat-related illness can start with muscle cramps and progress to weakness, dizziness, nausea, and vomiting.
So at that point, symptoms can include like major neurological dysfunction, so like seizures and coma, as well as failure of other major organ systems.
To prevent heat stroke, experts say pay attention to the heat index.
But one thing to remember about that is that it's taken in a shady area. So if you're in direct sunlight, you have to actually think in terms of it's going to feel even higher than the heat index.
And what we're finding is that the temperatures in the morning seem to be increasing even more than the afternoon temperatures. So there's kind of this asymmetry in how temperature is responding to all the pollution and greenhouse gases and things that we're putting into the atmosphere.
If the heat index is high, stay cool, stay hydrated, and avoid rigorous physical activity. Those are the basic precautions. But above all, listen to your body. The Louisiana legislature, from its budget surplus, is sharing some of that extra cash to fix roads and bridges. Lawmakers earmarked more than $1 billion to amplify $6 billion in federal dollars coming to the state from the bipartisan infrastructure law. I sat down with lawmakers and transportation officials to find out how the dollars will drive transportation improvements. About a quarter of Louisiana's roads are in poor condition. A recent report card by the American Society of Civil Engineers gives Louisiana a D+ for its rough ride on highways and byways. Bad roads are bad for business, contribute to higher car insurance rates, and pose safety hazards.
One of the main things driving the cost of high cost of automobile insurance is bad roads. Also, out of your control and my control. So obviously, wanting legislators, elected officials to secure funds to improve roads would go a long way to reducing the costs. I've seen estimates in recent years that suggest on average Louisiana families are spending upwards of $600 a year on automobile repairs due to bad roads.
It's a problem decades in the making. So what is the current backlog when we talk about roads and bridges and maintenance?
For the state highway system, it's $18.8 billion.
$18.8 billion.
Correct.
Historically, how did we get to this point with such a backlog?
Well, there's been a chronic underinvestment in transportation for decades. And so when you're underinvesting on an annual basis, the backlog of needs simply grows and grows and grows. So it's not something recent. It's been going on for a long time. And it's reached the point of $18.8 billion. Now, some of that $18.8 billion is the recent inflation. Our construction costs have increased approximately 70% in 2.5 years.
The newsflash here is the federal cash coming to the state to chip away at the burgeoning backlog.
This is a game changer for Louisiana.
U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy helped push the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which will funnel $6 billion for roads and bridges over a 5-year period.
I say for Louisiana, the bipartisan infrastructure bill helps us catch up where we should be in 2023, but it builds our economy for 2050. What do I mean by that? Well, there's billions for coastal restoration, billions for mitigating risk of flooding. There is Louisiana, now that's going to be spread across the nation, but Louisiana will get the lion's share of both of those.
On face value, $6 billion for the state's roads and bridges seems like a lot, but let's put it into context.
What's not said in the $6 billion number is that if we simply continued the regular federal transportation program for 5 more years, we would have gotten $4.8 billion anyway. So the net increase for Louisiana is really only about $1.2 billion, which is not a small number by any means. It's a couple $100 million a year, which is great, but it's not $6 billion that people were expecting, $6 billion on top of what we were already getting. And
the state is prioritizing more than 180 transportation projects for federal funding.
most of that is for bridges, and we scored very well in the federal bridge program. And so we intend to make good use of that money. We've been able to ramp up our what we call our on-system bridge program, which is bridges that are owned by the state, and we've also been able to ramp up our off-system bridge program, which is bridges that are owned by parishes and municipalities.
I could go through a list of the projects. I-49 North in Shreveport, I-49 South in Lafayette, the Calcasieu Ship River Bridge, completing the sixth laning of I-12 through the Florida parishes, road construction for the airport in New Orleans, and addressing the issues of the Mississippi River Bridge in Baton Rouge. By the way, there's also an I-14 interstate highway now authorized in central Louisiana, going east and west, connecting Fort Polk, Alexandria, and other communities with those east and west. That's authorized in this bill as well.
Some federal funding requires matching state funds. Lawmakers have allocated one-time funds from this year's budget surplus for transportation projects.
It's got to be to the tune of about $1 billion, because I mean, when you look at the numbers that we agreed to spend on one-time projects, that's what you're approaching.
You pay at the pumps for roads maintenance, a 20% fuel tax on gasoline and diesel that goes into the State Transportation Trust Fund.
But a lot of people don't realize is all the gas tax goes into a transportation trust fund, and about 2/3 of that pays for the department's salary, benefits, pensions, that type of stuff.
The bipartisan infrastructure law isn't a permanent fix to Louisiana's roadway woes, which begs the question and the quest to find a sustainable source of funds.
One of the problems we have with hybrid vehicles and now electric vehicles is you're getting less and less from a gas tax. So it's not a ton of money. It's used for some maintenance projects and then certainly to match federal dollars. But we need more to really do the job. And so a couple of years ago, we passed the bill that dedicated some of vehicle sales tax. I think that's a great way to do it. There's
going to have to be something to replace the fuel tax over the long term. And so those are discussions that'll have to be had at the state level and at the federal level for that matter. You know, there can be additional sales taxes or what's called a road user charge or a vehicle miles traveled charge.
Ultimately, the road to a smoother ride calls for sustainable funding sources. The bipartisan infrastructure law ignites a larger conversation about how to maximize federal dollars and state dollars to drive road maintenance and improvement. A conversation sure to surface in the next legislative session.
We're digging from a pretty big hole. But the good news is people are starting to see that and are open to doing other things to support you know, constructions.
Encouraged by Governor John Bel Edwards' opposition to the death penalty, nearly all inmates on death row applied for clemency last week. Cecilia Capel, an attorney, and Sister Helen Prejean hope the influx in clemency requests will force the state to re-examine the system. Take a look at what they had to say.
A lot of people, when they look at this picture, all these women dressed in white, they say, are they nurses? They're women on death row in Texas. This is Frances, who was executed in Texas. Carla Faye Tucker executed. The other two women are still alive.
Sister Helen Prejean is a well-known anti-death penalty advocate. She's a Catholic nun who ministers and supports death row inmates. Over the course of 40 years, she's seen most of them die.
This is Richard Glossop with his wife Leah and me. He had 3 last meals. For 26 years, the state of Oklahoma has been trying to kill him. He just got a unanimous decision in the Supreme Court for a stay of execution.
Sister Prejean, an advocate for decades, keeps pictures of the inmates she's worked with on the wall of her apartment as a reminder. But there's one picture missing: Manuel Ortiz. For 20 years, she's ministered Manuel and provided support as his execution date is decided.
I'd take one person at a time, and I had met Manuel on one of the earlier visits. He's a Catholic, I'm a Catholic. He said, Sister, would you take me? Would you be my spiritual advisor? So I said, yes. I never know when I take somebody on death row how long it's going to be. I'm going to see him through, whatever it is going to be.
But there's hope that he may never meet this fate. He's one of 51 inmates on death row asking for clemency before Governor John Bel Edwards' tenure ends. After 7 years in office, the governor publicly voiced his opposition to the death penalty during the legislative session.
For the first time, I'm calling on the legislature to end the death penalty in Louisiana.
Cecilia Capel is an attorney representing 13 of the clemency requests.
We decided to do this because the governor's public statements against the death penalty gave us an opportunity where we had an opening to potentially request that the pardon board commute the sentences, and the governor would, we hope, sign off on those commutations. And this opportunity is something that we're not going to see for probably a long time. Having a Democratic governor that is open about his opposition to the death penalty and his Catholic faith is just, it's a possibly once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for these guys.
So what's the process of filing for clemency?
We file a written application with a bunch of required materials to the pardon board in Baton Rouge. And the pardon board reviews those applications and decides whether to grant a hearing. And ultimately, it's a 5-member board, and they will make a decision whether to recommend a grant or deny clemency for this person. And that if they grant, that recommendation goes to the governor's desk, and he can decide whether to sign it or not.
The likelihood of an inmate receiving clemency is low. For context, only 2 governors have pardoned an inmate in the state of Louisiana. But it's also rare for an inmate to be executed. Only 28 have been put to death since 1983. The last execution was in 2010, when Gerald Bordelon waived his appeals and requested his death sentence be carried out.
We're not asking for the death penalty to be abolished in Louisiana. Of course, I would like that to happen. But what we're asking is for the board to take a second look at these people. And these are individuals, most of whom who have served decades in prison. They've had a lot of time to be rehabilitated within the system. These people on death row are not asking to be released, and in all likelihood they will not be. Some people on death row are actually innocent, and we've seen 9 people exonerated from death row just in the past 24 years, and that leads to the highest exoneration rate in the country from death row. And so we hope that this board cannot countenance having a person that's potentially innocent executed in Louisiana.
The death penalty is also extremely expensive. A 2019 study from Loyola University found that taxpayers shelled out more than $200 million on the death penalty system in the last 15 years.
And the more you look at the system and see how broken it is, you understand why.
Sister Helen Prejean knows the road to grant Manuel clemency is a long one that could end in heartbreak for her.
We'll see what happens, but what you do when you're working for justice is you work for the principle and of it, and then you leave the success up to God and the people.
Right now, 51 of the 57 inmates on death row have applied for clemency. Capitol is hoping to increase that number so that eventually all of the inmates will have applied. And now on to lighter news. I'm sure you guys have noticed we have a new face with us here in the studio. This is Karen LeBlanc. She is our new anchor for the state we're in. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, well, it's great to be back. I was born and raised in Baton Rouge, went to school here, graduated from LSU, started my journalism career here, and so it's really fascinating for me to be here covering the newsmakers I grew up with and back telling meaningful stories about the people and the place I so dear love. So.
And you've definitely come at a good time. We've got a lot coming up. This is an election year, so you will be busy.
Oh, have I ever. Politics is my jam, so there's going to be a lot of great stuff to cover during the gubernatorial elections.
And we're very excited to have you. And that's our show for this week. Remember, you can watch anything LPB anytime, wherever you are, with our LPB PBS app.
And you can catch LPB news and public affairs shows, as well as other Louisiana programs you've come to enjoy over the years. And please like us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
For everyone here at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Kara St. Cyr.
And I'm Karen LeBlanc. Until next time, that's the state we're in.
Every day, I go to work for Entergy.
I know customers are counting on me.
So Entergy is investing millions of dollars to keep the lights on and installing new technology
to prevent outages before they happen.
Together,
we power life.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.